record it just fine. Okay, just give me a moment, please. Okay, so I sent a copy of the questions. First, I just want to say thank you for doing this.
Oh, you're welcome. I'm sorry about the chaos of it.
Oh, it's okay. But yeah. Okay, so I have some questions regarding like the safety of having EHRs in like the cloud and such. And in the comments section, I posted the questions just so you could see them visually too.
All right.
Yeah. Okay, so the first question is, what kind of risk do you foresee in storing medical records in the cloud?
So, actually, so it's funny that you asked that question. So, I think the biggest risk that I see is there when you have records stored in the cloud, it's not necessarily that there's a lot of risk with the cloud side because a lot of the EHR vendors that are cloud-based EHR vendors have a lot of great security set up, meaning that they have encryption and that they have backups that are backed up to places that actually are very secure and very, I would say not hackable. I think one of the biggest issues is on the more the front end or the user side, the organization side, in implementing password policies, making sure passwords are strong passwords, making sure they're not easily to be guessed. Because what happens is with those simplicity of passwords and the fact that you can access it anywhere, it creates a lot of vulnerability. And there's a lot of systems out there that are built so a lot of organizations for usernames will use, first name, last name, or first initial, last name. And and these hackers know that. So they just start to fling through a whole bunch of different passwords and try to get it. So if you don't have strong upfront policies put into place, I think that's where vulnerability gets. I think the other vulnerability with some of the on the vendor side is that they don't know what they don't know. So they have set up these, great EHRs and they think they're storing them in secure places, but they're really potentially open to the public. And we've seen that happening. And that's more in like the one-off. So, the small dental practice electronic health record that a company might own versus the large, I would say, more well-known EHR vendors that are cloud-based.
So a way to like reduce these risks you think would be to make passwords more complex, usernames more complex, just making the like hospital side more complex like with security and such.
I think that's one of the sides. I think the other thing that any healthcare organization needs to do is they need to make sure that they're understanding the security side of what their EHR vendor is doing. And it's very common that you'll hear, and I'm assuming you know what the word HIPAA means because
Yes.
that's probably why you're doing this, but it's very common for you to have a vendor just say that I'm HIPAA compliant. And a lot of people will just say, cool, all right, well, then I don't
Mhm.
have to worry about it. But you still need to ask the questions and understand when they say they're HIPAA compliant, what does that actually mean? So it's both sides. So, but the onus really lies a lot with the covered entity or the hospital or clinic or whatever it is to ask the question of, okay, what are you doing? How are you storing our information? How are you protecting it? Is it encrypted? All of that stuff. But then setting up password policies and setting up, if you're idle in the system for 5 minutes, it's going to turn off. And if you fail a whole bunch of logins, it's going to alert us. So there's things on the front end that can be set up to reduce some of that security concerns as well.
Okay, so how often do you think a provider would include an assessment of its cloud provider and its own risk analysis? Like, do they ever check that?
Well, so number one should be anytime you're entering in with a new contract with a new vendor, that should be your first time. And
Hmm.
then I'm a firm believer that on a yearly basis that you should just be kind of doing it. They call it, so it's part of HIPAA. It's called evaluation, where what security controls do we have in place and are they really working? So that's really should be done on HIPAA doesn't define how often. Reality in the world is it's not happening very often unless people are getting like the incentive dollars that are out there.
Hmm.
But on an industry standard, it should be done at least annually, if not every 2 years, because you really want to make sure do is what we have in place really working, or do we have vulnerabilities out there? Or hey, let's do a check in with our EHR vendor to make sure they're feeling comfortable. And that's an okay thing to do. It's your information.
Okay. What happens if the cloud vendor suffers a breach? Who cleans up the problem, notifies patients, offers free credit monitoring?
Okay. So the cloud vendor, the vendor is responsible for doing the investigation and alerting the covered entity to say, hey, we've had a data breach. These are all the patients that are breached. This is the information. associate needs to do the investigation, notify the covered entity of everybody who was impacted, what happened, how it happened, what information, all of that stuff. And then the covered entity actually needs to be the one responsible to go and say, okay, hey, my patient, this happened because of our vendor. But we see a whole bunch of variances happen, but that's how the regulations are written. But the covered entity might go back to the vendor and say, you know what, this happened, this is your responsibility. I want to make sure that you're paying for the credit monitoring. So the negotiation starts on who covers what.
Mhm.
But ultimately it's the responsibility of the covered entity. So we've seen, and not necessarily with EHR vendors, but we've seen in the last couple months where the government, where the vendor has made the issue actually the issue. Actually, one just happened here in Minnesota. So the vendor lost the laptop that had the patient information on it.
Mhm.
The covered entity didn't have an agreement in place with the vendor, and therefore they got fined for the data breach that the vendor
Oh,
committed
okay.
because they didn't do the proper steps. So that's kind of how it works in the breach rule. Now there's a lot of negotiation that happens between that. So a covered entity may say, hey, when a breach occurs, we want to know about it when you're investigating because we might want to help out once you know enough. But ultimately, it's the covered entity's responsibility for notification. As far as offering credit monitoring and everything else like that, it's really going to be up to what the covered entity and business associate kind of agree upon.
Okay. So people often think that in the cloud would be more dangerous than having it in like their own hospital, like on paper. How do you feel about that? Like, which one do you prefer?
So, I think it depends on the organization, to be honest with you. So I think paper is actually the most vulnerable. So what I like to this is my little caveat, but you probably read about data breaches because if we're
Mhm.
having this conversation, you know what they are. So we have to report the ones that are greater than 500. So there's been like 1,500 of them since 2009 that have been greater than 500 people. And when they report them, they have to say, okay, where is this happening? So what source is this coming from? The top source of data breaches over 500 people is actually paper and X-rays. It makes up 23%. So
Wow.
people easily assume that it's on paper, it's safe, but that's actually not what the statistics are showing. So I do think that in some healthcare organizations that are small, that don't have dedicated information technology individuals to manage their security, that it might make sense for them to have it in the cloud EHR because they can't locally manage that to the level they need to. Whereas other organizations that have large integrated system that have teams of people working on security and protecting that it might make sense for them to host their EHR locally because it's easier for them. So I think it depends on the organization and what the complexity and what their IT structure looks like. So, but I do think that paper is vulnerable. I think the thing is we didn't know how vulnerable paper was, and people often because we hear about all these attacks and ransomware and all that kind of stuff, we forget about all the paper that's happening. So
Okay.
that's my 2 cents.
Last question. Knowing the risk of it, do you still believe that EHRs are a necessary step to improve healthcare?
I do. I think that so from my previous perspective, one of the things I worked for a healthcare system here in the Twin Cities, and as we started implementing our electronic health record, for the first time, we could see our patients traveling through all 4 of our emergency rooms in a day, getting drugs or seeking treatment. Or we had a patient who was seen yesterday at one hospital and now is seeing this hospital for a different issue, but what they might have had yesterday pertains to it. So I do think that the ability to have the record in multiple places at once, the ability to see a record across systems or potentially across multiple healthcare systems if we ever get to that point with interoperability, I truly believe that will improve healthcare. I just think that we are still in the operationalizing. How does that really work and how do we effectively do this? But I do think that there's been huge successes in the ability to communicate electronically, the ability for, if we were both working on the same patient, we could
Mhm.
both be in the record right now working while the patient's receiving care and another person's in the record. And I think that's huge. I mean, before when there's paper, it can only go to one person at a time. So
Mhm.
I do think so. I think it's just the matter of making it and making sure EHRs work for the providers. That's important too.
Okay, that's all I had. So thank you very much for answering them and taking
Okay, of course.
time.
Well, I'm glad this worked out. Thank you.
Yep, thank you.
All right, bye bye.
Bye. Yes. Yes. Ah. Oh my god, I hope.